The Chiefs are who I said they were before the season started. I'm not about to let them off the hook. Here's what I said before the season started. I said that I liked the hire of Andy Reid. Um, didn't like the move to get Alex Smith because that's not the type of quarterback that you can win a Super Bowl with. And said that this team I would expect to make marked dramatic improvements and probably win maybe like 10 games and be a wild card team, make the playoffs, but not win a playoff game. I believe that's all what I said. I said a lot more, but that's the general gist of it. And I was pretty much proven right on just about every single thing. Look, I don't want to sit there and take away from the Kansas City Chiefs because when you go from winning 2 games and having the number 1 overall pick to the next year winning 11 games and making the playoffs and coming this close to winning a playoff game, you've done something right. Now, the good thing for Andy Reid was he chose a very good situation, I feel. Smaller market, not quite as much pressure as a Philadelphia, and he came into a team that had talent in place. The guys like the Dontari Poes, the guys like the Tamba Halis and the Justin Houstons, the guys like the Eric Berries. There was talent on the defensive side of the football, and that helped. And defense and running the football behind one of the very best backs in all of the National Football League, Jamal Charles, was clearly an identity of this team, especially in the first half of the season. The Chiefs started off on fire. Now, they were taking advantage of a very soft schedule due to their last place finish from the year before, but hey, you got to beat who you got to play. You can only play who you're scheduled to play. And 9-0 is 9-0 in the NFL. I don't give a shit who you are. 9-0 is 9-0, and that is impressive. And that's what made Andy Reid to me a definite Coach of the Year candidate. Nowadays, as the schedule toughened a little bit, they had to play the Broncos twice. They had to play a couple of other good teams along the way. They, needless to say, scuffled home. They went from 9-0 to finishing 11-5. So that means 2-5 in their last 7 games. Then they get to the playoffs. They're up, 28 points at one point in time and end up losing in Indy to Andrew Luck and the Colts. Not a good finish to the season. Now, looking early on in the season, the first 9 games, the strength of that team was their defense and their ability to run the football behind Jamal Charles. That was their identity. Yes, they played a lot of soft teams and they played a soft schedule at the first half of the season, the first 9 games of the season. But their defense played outstanding most of those games, and Jamal Charles was a big-time player. He really was. Where Alex Smith was kind of scuffling along, and that Chiefs passing game was kind of scuffling along. It was kind of ironic as the season progressed. The offense seemed to open up a little bit for the Kansas City Chiefs. They played much better on the offensive side of the football all around. Alex Smith started to produce more, but it was that defense that was starting to be exposed for its lack of talent, for its weakness in the secondary. And, you definitely saw that play out in the San Diego game, the Indianapolis game, both times, frankly. Maybe both of the Denver games as well. When you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, they were one of those teams that reminded me a lot of the Chiefs teams of the past, of the 90s and the 2000s. Those teams that would win a bunch of regular season games and then fall apart and lose in the playoffs. They were built on defense. They were built on running the football. They didn't have the great quarterback play, and they lacked those explosive players on the offensive side of the football that can make big time plays. Really, to be honest with you, the only explosive player on the offensive side of the football for the Kansas City Chiefs is Jamal Charles. That's just the way it is. Now, with all that said, like I said, you have to give Andy Reid and that coaching staff a lot of credit. They went from winning 2 games in 2012 to 11 games in 2013 and made the playoffs. In a lot of other divisions in the NFL, they would have won the damn division winning 11 games. But unfortunately for them, they got stuck behind the eventual AFC champions, the Denver Broncos. Heading into this offseason, a lot of people will sit there in their mock drafts and the different NFL talking heads are going to talk about how the Chiefs need to improve on the offensive side of the football. They need to get another big-time playmaker at wide receiver opposite Dwayne Bowe. They could use an upgraded tight end. They need to re-sign Alex Smith long-term. Most of those things are true. I don't think you should be re-signing Alex Smith long-term to anything. However, it is what it is. You've already invested a lot into him by giving up 2 second-round picks. As a result, you pretty much have no choice at this point, I guess, is to ride with him for the next few years and see where you can go. Whether it's the right decision or not will ultimately remain to be seen. But I think it would be rather reckless for the Chiefs organization to sit there and go with a we only have problems on the offensive side of the football. There were games in the second half of that season that Kansas City Chiefs defense got shredded, got ripped apart. Manning did some work against him both times. Philip Rivers did a lot of work against him. Andrew Luck did some work against him in the regular season matchup, and then again in particular in the playoffs. Hell, Oakland put up over 30 points on their defense. Their defense has some flaws. They have some holes. Tyson Jackson, their former third overall pick from several years back, are they going to re-sign him? Maybe, probably not. So they need to get some talent to go along with Poe and DeVito on that front line. In the linebacking core, they could use a stud next to Derek Johnson. They could use a little more depth behind Houston and Hali at outside linebacker. And then they could definitely use some help in the secondary. Now, here's a cautionary tale that I need to inform a lot of Chiefs fans of, and a lot of Eagles fans will know exactly where I'm coming from. A lot of you are going to sit there and say, no, Schlick Daddy, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're full of shit, and blah, blah, blah. They're going to go after a wide receiver in the first round and a tight end in the second round and all this other crap. And to which I say, based off of history, you're an idiot and you're full of it. Because here's the history of Andy Reid. Traditionally, back in his days in Philadelphia, he would almost always take an offensive or defensive lineman in the first round. That was just the way he rolled. That's what he believed in. He believed you win through the trenches on both sides of the football. So he was always going to invest his highest picks more often than not. Jeremy Maclin being an exception, Donovan McNabb back in '99 being an exception. He was always going to invest those high first round picks on offensive and defensive linemen. And when he got to Kansas City this past draft, who did they take number one overall? It wasn't a skill position player, wasn't a quarterback. It was an offensive lineman, Eric Fisher. Let's think about that. Now, they also have a question of whether or not they're going to keep Brandon Albert long term, or they're going to flip Fisher over to left tackle. But I would highly anticipate and expect the Kansas City Chiefs at pick number 23, assuming they stay there, to go for an offensive or defensive lineman. It's just the history of this team. And in this case, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing for 2014, because they do need a better option than Tyson Jackson, in my opinion, a better all-around option at a 3-4-5 technique defensive end. And you can always use more offensive linemen. So I would be really surprised and stunned, frankly, if the Chiefs did spend their first-round pick on a corner or a safety or an inside linebacker or a wide receiver or a tight end. I'd almost be willing to take it to the bank at this point in time, at least. We're not even into February. That based off of history and based off of Andy Reid's history just right there in Kansas City last year, that they're going to take either an offensive or more likely not a defensive lineman in the first round to pair with Poe and DeVito up front. A good season for the Kansas City Chiefs. They have to be realistic, though. They went 11-5, but they weren't that good. And if the Chiefs don't do enough in the offseason through the draft and free agency to improve in their deficiency areas, this is a team that could turn right back around next year and maybe win 7 or 8 games and miss the playoffs. It's very, very possible.